Hello and welcome to the next episode of Daryo Talks. Today our guest is Stephen Lin, an entrepreneur and educator from California who has been living in Tashkent since September last year. He has taught entrepreneurship at British Management University and helped organize business plan competition. Before Tashkent, he had an experience of teaching soft skills for business and even created an entrepreneurship center in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Having a double degree in political economics and business management from UC Berkeley and an MBA from University of Southern California under his belt, Stephen has worked for large companies like Envision, UBS, and has done some startups in cities Taipei, Singapore, Johor Bahru, Malaysia, Las Vegas, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Almaty, and Tashkent. So Stephen, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. Okay. Today, we would like to talk about your experience in Uzbekistan and in the region, the startups that you're doing, and the problems that you're solving. The very first question that interests us is, what brought you to Tashkent? Why Tashkent?
Well, that's a pretty long story. I have to go back a couple of years. If you told me, 20 years ago that I'd be in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, I would thought you were crazy. But, it's been an incredible adventure, and I'm really enjoying being here. But how I got here was, about 10 years ago, I was doing my MBA program at USC, and my finance professor heard I did some work for, an investment company, and he asked me to give a seminar to Kazmunai Gas in Almaty. So originally he told me hey, it'd be, a 3-week workcation, you come, you give a seminar, and, explore a new country. And that's how I thought about it, because before then I knew nothing about Central Asia. And so I went to Almaty for 3 weeks, I gave a seminar, and at the end of it, he told me they just offered him a job as a dean of the business school, and he asked me to stay and start the Entrepreneurship Center. Mm-hmm. So 3 weeks actually became 3 years. And it was pretty incredible. I discovered that I really love teaching. I had an absolute blast in Almaty, in the region. I discovered Central Asia is just the best kept secret in its travel. It's a gorgeous place. And I actually planned on staying in Almaty for a long, long time. Unfortunately, there was some family matters that I had to take care of. I moved back to America. I worked for a big corporation in healthcare, and did IT projects, innovation planning, some pretty cool stuff, but wasn't quite the same as working in Central Asia. I also did another startup in Las Vegas, and after I exited that business, I received a phone call from my old professor, and he said, "Hey, we just started a new university here in Tashkent. Why don't you come and check it out?" And that's how I ended up in Uzbekistan.
Wow, great. And what have you been teaching at the university?
So I focus mostly on entrepreneurship. I use a methodology called LaunchPad, which was actually created at my alma mater. It came out of UC Berkeley and Stanford. And what they did is, back then they surveyed a bunch of entrepreneurs, and they asked them, how useful was your college, education? And back then, all the entrepreneurs said, "Oh, it's completely a waste. It's a useless, right? No good." Yeah. And all these educators and all these researchers said, "Okay, we need to fix this." Yeah, yeah. So they completely rewrote the textbook on how to teach entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. And the end result was something called Lean Launchpad, or Lean. Mm-hmm. And it's a methodology that's spread all over the world now. And a lot of big companies have actually come out from that class. And so the difference about this class and this methodology is that in a lot of traditional classes, right, about entrepreneurship, they teach very theoretical things, like what is the personality traits of entrepreneurs, what is Schopenhauer's theory on entrepreneurship, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that academic study of entrepreneurship, but it's not really useful for creating startups. And how Lean is different is that, for example, in my class, all my students form teams, right? We start with a bad business idea, and the fundamental concept is that you're not supposed to come up with, a perfect business idea and a perfect business plan because you don't have data, right? You start with a bad idea, and you constantly test and evolve the idea to find product market fit, right? And then that's when you have a business, right? The function of a startup is very different from the function of a business, right? The function of a startup is to discover the business model. The function of a business is to scale the business model, right? Two very different things.
So besides your university teaching career, right now you're starting up a business that is also directed to educating the new generation of entrepreneurs.
Yes, we are a startup for startup. It's launchcentral.co, and pretty much we're taking Lean LaunchPad, we're taking Y Combinator, and this pretty much just copying the parts that work, and we're modifying it for the Central Asian market. And the basic idea is that we're trying to address structural issues within the ecosystem here. So, for example, a lot of the universities here all focus on one specific field, right? So one school will be all business students, one school will be all engineers, one school will be all translators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in order to have, a really strong team for a new company, you need to have a mix of skill sets.
Yes.
Right? So the way we're addressing that is we're creating a cross-university class, right? We're very fortunate. We just secured support from some of the biggest VC firms, like Big Sky Capital, Sturgeon Capital, a Local Ventures. And what we're doing is that we are putting these cross-skill teams together, right? We have them meet with business coaches, mentors, right? People from overseas, right? We have regular coaching where we do the hard work, the grunt work of entrepreneurship, where we, over a period of 2 semesters, we drive them through this startup process, building your MVP, finding your customer, right? And at the same time, due to our incredible, amazing partners, we actually give free seed funding to each of our teams so they can build the product and find customers. Like our goal is to just maximize the number of investable startups that come out of our cities, right? And I'm super excited about the program.
So, and you're going to scale it up to the region and elsewhere further, right?
Yes, yeah. So I've taught entrepreneurship in Central Asia for about 3-4 years now, right? And I've taken care to design the program to be as scalable as possible. In other words, right, we're pricing it deliberately low so it's attractive for universities to join our project, right? And all you need in each city is, we're designing the process where, students join a Telegram channel with bots, they form teams. Teams with similar ideas across cities can pool their resources and test markets simultaneously, right? And the idea is that once we prove the concept, we can just cut and paste this model across cities in Central Asia, right? And make teams that are really cost efficient.
Yeah, so and basically your startup is for startups and
Yes.
for startup ecosystem. And startups appear when there is a problem and when there are challenges. So what are the challenges of ecosystem do we have here in the region?
A lot of different things. So I've worked in developing markets, almost my entire career. I've been in many different countries. A lot of the problems here are common to all developing markets. For example, I grew up in a conservative family culture, even though I was in a liberal city, right? For one thing, for example, let's say you have a really strong student graduating from a top university. And when he graduates, he might have been working on a startup company, right? At the same time, he gets an offer from, say, a big four company, right? I mean, you and I both know that we know what the parents are going to say, right? And what on the right choice would be. But if you look at this situation economically, it's kind of a waste, right? Because, if you have 10 of these students, right, at least one of them would have created a successful company, or would have created jobs, would have created business. And there's no economic reason why that big four company could have just given him, take a year off, right? Start working a year, right? The big four company, it doesn't cost them any money, right? It just reduces his risk, right? Because right now the system is that we're kind of punishing top students for taking the risk of being entrepreneurial, right? So my program aims to mitigate or address some of these issues, and that would be one of the problems. Other issues, for example, Uzbekistan, like many other countries, have a Soviet legacy, right? So, and in many cases, right, say, the work culture or management culture is, say, aggressive, right? Where, say, there's not a focus on, say, process and procedure. It's more a focus of command and obey, right? And there are elements of that in the secondary schools here as well, which isn't necessarily optimal for entrepreneurship, right? So to address that, right, all of our mentors and our business coaches, right, we build out tasks for our students, right? We get them further enough along the process until they realize, hey, I can make a living doing this, and then essentially they switch from being someone who is taking orders to someone who's proactively building a business where they have a vision and they're driving towards it. And it's amazing to see. You see this, it's like a light bulb going off, right? Where students who are doing homework suddenly realize no, I'm a business owner, right? And it's a great thing to see.
I see. And as a person who graduated, top programs at top schools in the U.S. and had experience of working in different countries all around the world, what would your, which areas would you point out as areas of improvement that need to be improved, and what would your recommendations be for policymakers, for people who really care about the startup and entrepreneurial ecosystem development?
Okay, I mean that's a big question. I can take a stab at it. One issue I see here, and honestly I've seen this in Malaysia, I've seen this in Thailand, I've seen this in many countries, is that there is a focus for investment and allocation of resources on, I guess, the appearance of things, as opposed to, say, the process or sustainability or the results of things. For example, there might be programs to, say, grow any social good, right? Like entrepreneurship, any goal you may have. And I see a lot of big buildings being constructed, right? So you see organizations, building a beautiful building, spending, lots and lots of money. And then and then the organization, doesn't spend any money on staff to fill the big building, right? So there's a focus on things that are easy to sell or easy to publicize, as opposed to fundamentals. Like, for example, in entrepreneurship, for example, you see a lot of things that, you see contests and hackathons. Now, don't get me wrong, these things are great and they're also necessary, right? But they're also insufficient, right? Because you see the areas that get the most amount of attention are things that are very flashy, very glamorous, right? But the thing is entrepreneurship is a lot of work. And a big portion of that work is very boring. It's grunt work, right? But it's the work that's necessary, right? So when people think of entrepreneurs, they think of movies, They think of that moment where you're on stage pitching to investors, right? You know, what they don't think about is, you know, the 20 iterations of my MVP.
Hours and hours of
Right,
cold calling.
right. The hours of cold calling, right? The networking, right? The asking people for their friends so I can talk to their friends, and like, you know, and I sound really embarrassed when I, like, all the unsexy parts that are the foundation of building a business, right? That's really crucial. So I would say to, I don't know, institutions that want to change things, to look at things systematically, see the bigger picture. I mean, some people call it design thinking. I just call it, you know, seeing the bigger picture.
I see.
Right. So like when people are, say, funding programs, right now it's very popular to use KPIs, but they only see, again, the surface of things.
Yeah.
Right. They'll just say like, oh, like, I don't know, 5,000 people watch my video on, you know, on being a better person or being an entrepreneur. Right? When the real metric should have been, you know, how many good investable startups or how many jobs were created. Right? What was a good process, was a good scalable, repeatable process, was it an efficient process, was that created, or will all of this stop once the money is gone?
Yeah.
Right.
Eventually, this is what makes the biggest difference, right?
Yeah, you can't just focus on the image. You have to focus on the system as a whole, right? Is this a healthy system? Is this a system that will produce results over time, right?
So when it comes to, again, startup ecosystem development and creating conducive environment for that, what should be the role of the government?
So that itself could be a whole long conversation. I think it's important for policymakers to realize that the role of the government is to be a gardener, right? Not a carpenter, right? Because markets are extremely complex and they grow exponentially complex over time. It is impossible for any institution to completely understand how the entire system works, right?
And manage
everything, right? That was a failure of a centralized economy, right?
Yeah.
Economies, especially modern economies, are just simply too complicated, right? And what a government or policymakers should aim to do is, how do I set the environment, right, so that healthy markets can form, right? And to do this, right, you need to have people who understand how markets work, right? Understand how to prevent bad actors, right? How to make efficient markets that reduce, that try to mitigate inequality and maximize transparency, right? How do we make a system I don't see capitalism as an ideology. I see markets as a tool, right? And the thing is if you try to do everything yourself, right, it quickly spirals out of control, right? Because there's too many problems that are impossible to predict. But what you can do is have guiding principles, right, that encourage good behavior by market participants. And the key principle is that if someone does something that's good for himself, it should also be good for the overall system or society, right?
So both profit and purpose.
Yes. Like we were talking about like social enterprise earlier, right? Are you incentivizing business that is the creation of wealth, or are you incentivizing business that is the transfer of wealth?
I see. So, and as you not only came to Tashkent to teach business classes, but also you are doing some bet on the region, starting up your own business. What are generally, what would you say are the opportunities in the region that are unrealized?
Oh gosh, there are a lot. There is incredible potential here. And it's kind of like, if you imagine Gordon Ramsay or a famous chef, and you brought him incredible ingredients, right? Like, if all the pieces are put together, right, in a good way, you're going to have an incredible result, right? Which, because all the pieces are there, right? Give it a little bit time to cook, right? Put them together in the right way, and you'll have something incredible. And so, I mean, there are a lot of structural industries that are being built now, right? I mean, I guess the most obvious one would be transportation, logistics, right? Because, you know, I know people talk about Uzbekistan being double landlocked, but it's also in a key geographic location, right? So that's the ones everyone knows, but there are a lot of other things too. For example, like say credit scoring and factoring, right? I know one startup team. They gather the sales and transaction data of a lot of vendors across the city, which is very valuable data if you use it right. Right, that can be the basis of credit scoring, right? That can be the basis of factoring, right? Like allowing efficient allocation of capital so that more business can be created. There is some, I mean, more specifically, there is some like financial things that can be done. For example, if I look at FDI figures, right? I notice a lot of FDI is large corporation coming here and building their own plant and building their own thing. It's individual, it's single entity finance, right? That entity provides the financing for that project, right? Whereas in a developed financial market, you have a lot of different parties pooling funds to give to a third party to invest in a project. For example, if I'm an American corporation or Europe or any other country's corporation, I want to invest in Uzbekistan, a big thing I worry about is currency risk, right? I build a factory to build this, to sell over there, right? But the currency, I might make 20% profit, but the currency went down 50%. So I did a good job, but I still lost money, right? So in a lot of markets, the way they addressed that was they had a currency, like a hedging market. Whereas, for example, like essentially it's buying insurance on the currency, right? Where like, like I invest $100 in that country, it makes 10% per year or 20% per year. I pay 2, 3, 5% on insurance to make sure that I get the same rate of currency, right? So there are still a lot of systemic industries that help other industries grow. But this is general FDI stuff.
I understand that your answers are brief enough, and if we keep talking about that, we're going to have a long conversation. And as the last question, I'm going to ask, what would be your recommendation for students who are studying business, entrepreneurship? What are the top advice that you give for them?
Okay. I would say that be confident, right? You're young, right? You have family, you can learn quickly, you can try new things, you can take risks, right? And that in some ways you are a very lucky generation, right? If you imagine 2, 3 generations ago, right? No internet, right? It would have been impossible for you to create an app, right? Or to learn computer science, right? Or to learn machine learning. All that's available online now if you try hard and you're focused, right? So not only can you learn everything you need to create a great product very cheaply, especially in Uzbekistan. You create a great product here, with very low costs, right? And you can take that product and sell it with almost no transportation costs to a globalized market, right? My parents did not have that opportunity. Your grandparents didn't have that opportunity. But if you're a young person now, right, you can do that here, right now, right? Like that's in many ways they're the luckiest generation yet.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Stephen, for your time. And we will be happy to have another conversation sometime later.
It'd be my pleasure and my honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.